Hello champions and future champions, hello ChessMood family. GM Gabuzian is here with you and we are going to do today daily test coverage for the December month. This is our first position and this is the test for the daily lesson difference in structure. It's white to move. We have the following picture. Square on d5 is available for our knight and black knight now is occupying square on d4. As you remember from the daily lesson, here is difference of the pawn structure. Black, because of over-advanced pawns, can never fight for d5 square. We in future can play pawn c3 move and remove opponent's knight from d4. But the thing is, if we now directly play knight d5, this is a blunder, because black can play rook d5, pawn takes, and e4 check. They are going to take our bishop, and this material imbalance, two pieces of opponent versus our rook, will be questionable. For this reason, at the beginning, white plays a strong prophylactical move, which is pawn g3. We are closing the diagonal and now going to make our idea. After pawn b5, knight d5. Bishop is under attack, capturing is no longer working because pawn on g3 covers an important diagonal. Here black can play something like bishop a5, and after pawn c3 move, we eventually managed to remove opponent's knight from the outpost, getting our own on a great position. Now let's go ahead and see our next position. This is a test for the daily lesson Unstoppable Triple Fork. At this position, opponent's queen and both rooks are standing in a perfect spot. Just imagine if we have knight c5 option. At the moment, this is impossible. Opponent's pawn on d6 safely protects position. As well, our c3 knight can never get to c5 square at the moment. We need to make some adjustments. Here white plays pawn e5. Black can capture and we will see it in a second. Just let me mention that going bishop h4 is impossible because of pawn g3 move. Bishop will be trapped. For this reason after e5, black is forced to take. But now we're getting rid of d6 defender and there is no longer pawn on e4 square. White can continue knight e4. And the thing is that knight c5 move is unstoppable. Whatever opponent plays, we're making our triple fork and winning the game. Also let me mention that black cannot capture on f4, trying to get some pawn compensation, because already instead of knight c5, we'll capture bishop f6, and black cannot take back with the pawn, because knight f6 check wins the queen with another fork. Now let's go ahead and see our next example. This is a test for the daily lesson Convert Winning Position, and we're discussing cases when we need to take care of opponent's ideas. At the moment, white has a huge space advantage in the center and passed pawn on the h file, strong rook controlling the g line, and opponent's pieces are passive and limited. For this reason, white has advantage. But at the same time, let's not forget about black's chances on the other side of the board. They have knight on a4, pressuring on our pawn chain. Black at the moment has a threat. They want to play queen b6, attacking on b2 pawn. And if we defend it with rook b1, there is knight c3, tactical move. Black's forking our queen in the rook, capturing the pawn, and if we take back, queen b1 move wins the exchange. For this reason at the beginning, white needs to be careful, and playing first rook g2 is a very strong prophylactical move. Now we put our rook on the second rank, and after queen b6, we can go king to g1. Already our queen side is safe, and white can slowly go for the king side advancements. After bishop d7, we can go bishop to g5, exchanging bishop, which is the blocker of our strong passed pawn. In this way, white obtains a huge advantage. Let me add you one more time, in winning positions, it's very important to prevent opponent's ideas. Now let's go ahead and see the next one. This is a test for the daily lesson. Winning move? Do this. In other words, very often during the game, we can see positions and a move that we're thinking we're going to win right at this moment. But often these moves are tricky and we can blunder. The thing is, we need to double check these decisions. At this moment, white has a huge pressure through the g file and chances to checkmate opponent's king. Let's pay attention that opponent's bishop is aiming at our rook on g1. At the moment, if we play bishop e7, threatening queen g7 checkmate, at the same time opponent's queen is under attack, what do you think? Is it winning? It's not really winning, because instead of capturing back and being mated, black can play queen f4 check, which is a tempo, and after king b1, they can firstly take our rook on g1 square. Now black gets rid of all the threats, at the same time they are winning material, and for this reason now white is the side who is getting big problems. For this reason, beginning bishop e7 move is not really working. At the moment, best choice for white is to play rook takes d3, which is a tempo attacking on opponent's king. Only after this, white can think about different winning ideas. We need to be careful when trying to make the winning move and double check if it's really winning or it's not. Now let's go ahead and see our next position. This is a daily lesson test, returning extra material. At the moment it's black to move, or exchange up, but the thing is our rook on e8 is under attack and we cannot save this piece. So we need to return the material. The thing is we have a choice to give it back for opponent's bishop on h4, bishop on a4 or knight on g6. Let's take a look at all of these options. If we now go rook to d8, which is logical to give away the rook for the bishop which opponent is missing, after bishop takes and rook takes, even though we get some control over the dark squares, opponent gets stronger play on the queen side through the c file. They go rook c1. Now we don't have open line control. White has all the time threat of rook c7 move if we're removing our bishop to any other square, and it's not really clear how to continue this game. White's knight on g6 is strong, but it can go to f5 spot and get even stronger, attacking on black fixed pawns on h6 and d6. White's bishop all the time threatens to go to e6 once we move our rook from d8 square. For this reason, it's a bad choice to give our exchange back for bishop on h4. If we're doing it for bishop on a4, it's very similar. After something like king g7, white can take, rook takes and go now rook c1, again controlling the open line. Now they keep the threat of knight e7 and knight f5 moves, and dark squared bishop can attack our pawn weaknesses again. For this reason, decision is very unexpected. We're going to return exchange for opponent's knight. Well placed rook e to c8. The idea is that after knight e7 check, king g7, knight takes and rook takes, we are the side who controls the open line. On top of this, opponent's knight was stronger than the bishop's because it has a strong outpost on f5 square. At the moment, we're threatening to go knight g5, we'll be fine to exchange our knight for opponent's bishop, and already we can create threats on opponent's queenside pawns, playing something like bishop to d4. This is an important difference, and often when returning back material to opponent, we need to make as many benefits out of this as possible. Now let's go ahead and see our next example. This is a test for a daily lesson, destroying 7th rank. Previously we have seen how to do this with the pawns. This time we have our knight on h4, and the strongest move here for white is knight g6, since rooks together on the 7th rank are very strong and they can destroy opponent's king's position. White's getting this resource. Now bishop on f4 and rook on f8 are under attack. If black doesn't capture the knight, they are losing material, and if they take, we're making our favorite checkmate. Rook g7, king h8, rook h7, and after king g8, rook bg7 is mating. That's the power of rooks on the 7th rank next to opponent's king. Now let's go ahead and see the next one. This is the test for the daily lesson, bishop e3 versus bishop g7. We're discussing different spots when our bishop on e3, whether it's standing well or not, and the importance of having this bishop. At the moment, question was the following: is knight g4 a good move in this position or it's not? Black tries to obtain this bishop on e3 square, but the thing is knight on g4 is not protected very well. The only defender is bishop on c8. Our queen is attacking, we cannot take right now, but we have bishop b5 check. If black plays here bishop to d7, we can already take queen g4 using the fact this bishop is under a pin and we're winning the piece. Otherwise, after the check, black cannot save this knight. If they go knight to d7, we'll again capture on g4. If black goes now knight to c6, we are winning different material with knight takes c6, pawn takes and bishop c6 check. We won the pawn on the next move, capturing opponent's rook on a8 square. For this reason, at this position, knight g4 is impossible. Now let's go ahead and see our next example. This is a test for the daily lesson, the right support. It's about situations when we have rooks on the 7th rank next to opponent's king, but rooks itself are not enough to checkmate, and we're trying to bring support for our rooks. As you have seen in the daily lesson, those are our pawns. Even though black has f5 and h5 pawns, limiting ours on the king side, and as well pawn on a4, which is ready to be advanced to a queen. White has a strong resource, which is pawn g4 move. If black ignores this and tries to push the pawn to a3, we can capture on f5 and on h5. It's the same. After a2, we go h6, or f6 in other situation, protecting important rook on g7 square, and now after a promotion of opponent, white's mating with rook h8 move. For this reason, black cannot ignore g4, but the thing is, if they are capturing, it's even faster. After hg4, we go h5 and h6 on the next move, and after g4, if black takes with the f-pawn, we're going f5. After d5, trying to play rook d6, black is just late. We're going f6, rook h8 is unstoppable, and white is mating here. This is the important thing to support the right rook and create mating threats against opponent's king. Now let's go ahead and see the next one. This is a test for the daily lesson, play actively. It's about situation when we are winning pawn in the opening and we think that after that we have to play passively, go for a defense. Not at all. In this position, bishop e2 is the passive move which happened, but the right solution is to go bishop to c4, keeping it in the game, going knight f3 sometimes to d3 or pawn to d4 and playing very active. It doesn't matter if we are pawn up or not. It never means we need to play passive. Now, let's go ahead and see the next one. This is a test for the daily lesson, passer in Rook Endgame. In other words, we discussed the importance of passed pawn in different endgames, and we have seen that in the Rooks one, it's not that important. For example, at the moment, our queen can be traded off on the long diagonal. If we capture on b7, rook takes back, and even on rook g5 winning the pawn, black can put the rook behind of our pawn, going rook b3. Also, this prevents options of white's king activity. If now we try to push with a6, black goes rook a3 and winning the pawn. Otherwise, after rook b3, black wants to play rook to a3 square, and this will be a very safe position for black. Even though they are pawn down, their rook is protecting the pawn advancement on the a file, at the same time pressuring on white's kingside position. For this reason, at the beginning, it's not really great for white to trade off the queens. But how to do it? Is there a chance to keep the queens on the board? And this was your homework. There is a beautiful rook e8 check at the moment. The thing is now, black cannot take the rook because queen b7 wins the queen. Otherwise, after rook e8 check, if black goes king g7, we can play rook b8, queen takes at a6. We are not even winning the pawn, but with our queen support, we can easily promote. Now white has a threat. We want to play queen to b7. Black cannot take it back because pawn will be promoted. Otherwise, after any other move, we go a7. Queen very safely protects our king on the long diagonal, at the same time supporting the pawn. For this reason, it's winning for white. Now let's go ahead to see our next position. This is a test for the daily lesson, f takes e4, bishop takes e4 in Dutch defense. In other words, in these structures, sometimes we have a choice. Do we capture with the bishop or with the pawn? We have seen examples when capturing with the pawn is good, and let me mention that taking is not meaning we kill our bishop on b2. Not at all. Pawn on e5 is a powerful piece. It blocks opponent's kingside options, limiting pawn on f7, and white gets a space advantage. Also, at the same time, capturing with the bishop is logical. We keep it up on the open line and trying to create threats with the support of our queen, with queen g3 moves in future. What we're trying to say, that capturing with both is logical, and always it depends on the situations. Sometimes one will be better than the other choice. Now let's go ahead and see our next position. This is a test for the daily lesson Rook Endgame blockade. It's about a situation when opponent has a strong passed pawn on the a file and our rook is very passive on a1 square, barely blocking the pawn. We don't have any active options with our queen. It will be very logical to substitute our pieces. White can play now king b2 and sacrifice pawn on d4. Let me quickly mention that taking opponent's passed pawn with rook a2 doesn't work because the pawn endgame after rook a2, king takes and king e3 is lost. Black will be much faster capturing our pawns, and with the passed pawn on g4, black will be winning. That's why after king d4, we cannot take, but white can play now rook d1 check. And after king e3, already king a1. Take a look at this picture. Now our king successfully blocks the pawn, all the time attacking it. And the rook is getting a freedom. If black tries to go king f2 and attack our pawns, we can play rook to d2 check, protecting on h2, or going rook to d4 and attacking opponent's pawn on g4. Including the rooks, this position will already be saved for the white side. It's very important to have the right piece blocking opponent's pawn and as well right piece in a freedom in the rook's endgame. Now let's go ahead and see our next example. This is a test for the daily lesson Keep the Tension. It's about situations when we have options to increase the pressure, but instead of it, we would like to simplify the position. Now, white has a pressure on the queen side. We don't want to take on c6 because this is releasing the pressure, and as well after pawn takes, black more or less gets a stability on the queen side. Instead of doing this at the beginning, white can try to keep the tension and fight for a better advantage. We would like to break opponent's pawn chain, and white now can play pawn a5. Our threat is very dangerous. We want to go pawn a6, and whenever this pawn chain will be broken, we will get strong supported passed pawn. Black cannot take on b5 because we take on b7 and that's winning. c6 will be the next move. Otherwise, after a6, black cannot take on a6 as well. We'll take back on the c6 square, winning pawn on a6 and getting strong pawns on the c file. After a5, if black tries to capture on b5 square, we have a strong move. White can continue pawn to a6. Temporarily we want to ignore pawn on b5, but this exchanges pawn on b7. After it takes and knight a6, we are going to take back on the b5, and white will get strong supported passed pawn on the c file. In opposite, opponent's passed pawn on the a file is weakened and it's blocked. For this reason, we need to keep the tension and release it at the necessary moment. Now let's go ahead and see our next example. This is a test for the daily lesson. Make bishop pair stronger. We have an interesting situation right now. French pawn structures. White's trying to attack on the king side, have a lot of activity and destroy opponent's king. In opposite, black finds ideas on the queen side. Now they have a huge control over the open line and threats like rook c2, sometimes doubling up, sometimes going rook a2, next rook will go to c2 square, and it can be dangerous. Before starting the concrete attack, white needs to take care of this, and we have perfect pieces for this goal. White can play now bishop d3 check, which is a tempo, and after king g8, bishop d2. At the moment, our bishops are nullifying power of opponent's pieces. They control squares on c3, c2 and c1. No entry squares for them on the queen side. In opposite, now we're ready for our attack. White can play h4, h5 and g5 or push differently, getting strong play against opponent's king. Standing together, bishop pair is very powerful and often controls a lot of important squares, as in this example. Now let's go ahead and see our next position. This is a test for the daily lesson. One pawn blocks 3 pawns combined. In other words, situation when with our pawn we are fixing opponent's one and getting advantage on the other side. At the moment white is pawn down. Usually in the endgame it's a huge issue. On top of this, pawn on a4 is under opponent's bishop attack. Looks like we're doing very badly here. But the surprising thing is that white's winning in this position, and the strong move is bishop b5. Attacking opponent's bishop, we're forcing black to take. Pawn takes back, and take a look at this picture. Pawn on b5 blocks opponent's queen side. On the other hand, we have flexible pawns on the king side, and if now black goes with king f8, trying to stop these pawns, we're gonna go to d7, take opponent's pawns on c7, a7 and b6. If black now, after a takes b5, goes king to d8, we play h4, creating an outside passed pawn on the king side, and again if black goes king e8, we can play g5. Exchanging the pawns, our threat is to go g6, g7. After king f8, we switch again to the queen side, king d7, winning all of these pawns and winning with passed pawn on b5. Surprisingly, one pawn is blocking 3 of opponent's pawn. This is a very powerful endgame technique, and you will get the chance to surprise your opponent at the right moment. Now, let's go ahead and see the next one. This is a test for the daily lesson anti-Semi-Hippo Setup. And at the moment, using the absence of opponent's knight on f6 square, white can go h4, trying to create attack with pawn h5, open up the h-line and create a lot of threats. If black goes pawn h5, we can play pawn g4 using another effect. Black cannot take with the bishop because b7 is not protected. We will take bishop b7 and exchange on a8 will be lost as well. For this reason, after g4, black has to take with the pawn and again with h5, followed by bishop h6, some knight e4 or knight d5 moves. White creates a very strong attack. In this daily lesson, we discussed a specific strategy against this setup. Now let's go ahead and see our next example. This is a test for the daily lesson opposite color bishop strategy. It's a situation when one of the sides has the passed pawn and opponent bishop blocks this through the dark squares. We need to create our strategy, and it's the following. We're trying to support our pawn with our king, and opponent's bishop alone will not be able to prevent our threats. They will need to bring king for the defense. White continues pawn a5. We want to go a6 and a7. It happens king f6, and before advancing the pawn, we make bishop d5. It's important to keep an eye on f7 pawn, and this will make opponent's king chances to join the game little more difficult. Black goes king e7, king d4, also bringing the king is important. And now black has to play f6. The idea is to release the king, and now they can go with the king to the queen side. It happens a6, a7 is the threat, so bishop b8 is forced, and king c5. After now king d7, white can continue king to b6. And the thing is that a7 is unstoppable. At the moment, if black goes king to c8, we can go bishop e6 check, king d8, and even not playing a7, which only wins the bishop, but firstly playing king to b7, removing the bishop and just promoting a queen. For this reason, after king d4, if black goes f6, they are not on time to stop our pawn. If black now goes bishop to c7, and after a6, trying to play bishop b6 check, it also doesn't work. We now go king c4, idea is king b5, king c6. Black cannot prevent this with king d6 move because bishop f7 wins the second pawn. Otherwise, after king c4, our maneuver is unstoppable and again, white is winning. So this is an important strategy. When you're a pawn up, supporting your passed pawn with the king, which is stronger than opponent's bishop. Now let's go ahead and see our next example. This is a test for the daily lesson, passer in opposite colored bishops endgames. It's white to move. We're 2 pawns down, but we know that our king successfully blocks opponent's pawn on the h-file. What to do on the other side of the board? Black has 3 versus 2, and a dangerous threat. Black wants to play pawn b5. Even though it sacrifices the pawn, if we take, we will have 2 pawns blocked by one of opponent on the c-file, and black wants to go now king d4, advancing the pawn. With 2 pawns, black will be easily winning in this game. We need to prevent this. And the strong move here is pawn b5. With this, we locate our pawn on the light squares. c6 is the only way to create a passed pawn, but as you can see, it's not gonna be possible. White very safely blocks all of opponent pawns on the queen side, and this position will be absolutely drawish. For this reason, it's very important to prevent opponent's chances of creating the passed pawns. Now let's go ahead and we will see the next position. This is a test position for the daily lesson Strong Trick with Pawn Structure. At the moment, white played c4 and they have a threat. They want to play pawn c5. Question was the following: is c5 a good move for black in this position or it's not? In real, it doesn't work because instead of capturing at the moment, white has a strong b4 move. However we take, you know that white's going to get pawn on c5. We cannot take cb4 because of pawn c5 move. At the same time, after b4, we cannot take on d4 because of the same reason. And as well, we cannot capture on c4 square because white takes back on c5 and again wins our piece. Instead of playing c5 at the beginning, black is supposed to exchange the pawns on c4 square, dc4, pawn takes and pawn takes c4, getting a quite playable position. Now let's go ahead and see the next one. This is a test for the daily lesson bishop-pawn teamwork. At the moment, black's light squared bishop is not that strong because of the pawns on the same light squares. Black needs to change this, and the strong structural idea here is the following. Black wants to go pawn to d4, followed by pawn c5, and pawn b6 moves. Now bishop will become very strong on the long diagonal using power of the light squares. This is a strategy when you have a bishop locating pawns on the opposite color. Now let's go ahead and we will see our next position. This is a test for the daily lesson Target on h6. It's about situations when we're targeting opponent's pawn, sacrificing it with our bishop and starting a strong attack. At this moment, white would like to go queen to d2 and capture on h6 immediately. Just the thing is, queen d2 is too slow, and black gets a tempo, playing knight to c4. Now our queen is forced to leave this diagonal. That's why directly going for queen d2 doesn't work. It's not necessarily to have queen on d2 to start our tactical ideas. Here, we're going to use that knight on a5 is not protected. What's going to play bishop h6 first? Pawn takes, and now queen d2. Pawn on h6 is under attack, but if black protects it with the king, we will capture opponent's knight, staying with an extra pawn and crash position of opponent's king. Black cannot accept this. They have to play knight c4, but this time we are going to capture on h6. Our threat is knight f6 check, and that will be decisive. If black goes bishop f8, knight f6 is even mating at the moment. That's why black needs to get rid of the central e5 pawn. But now we have another strong move. White continues knight f to g5. The threat is queen h7 and queen h8 checkmate. If black takes bishop g5, we'll take back with the knight. Now we'll have a lot of threats. Queen and knight versus lonely king of opponent will be more than enough. We can very quickly bring our rooks into the game, and this attack is very strong and white's winning. It's very nice to notice that pawns like h6 are very good targets for sacrifice and future attacks. Now let's go ahead and see our next position. This is a test for the daily lesson Traitor Pawn. We have seen this position previously, and we know that knight g6 was a mistake. The reason is white's getting strong bishop on the long diagonal, supported by the queen, and a lot of threats against our king. Question here is the following: how to play for black? We're using power of the Traitor Pawn, and let me remind you, we call it traitor because it's the defender of opponent's king. And black plays now knight g2. We want to close this long diagonal. At this moment, bishop on f4 is also under attack. White will have this bishop out of the game, but also if they decide to capture, it's not that simple. Black takes back, king g2 and bishop c6 check. We're getting monster bishop on the long diagonal, and even though white now is pawn up, position will be very unclear. White has to play pawn f3, and we will be able to create a lot of threats. At least black's getting monster bishop, which is also a good defender for their own king. So knight g2 at the beginning was the right answer. Let's go ahead and see the next one now. This is a test for the daily lesson, most common mistake of beginners. It's about situations when they are trying to exchange everything they see, releasing the tension. At this moment, black played c5 and question was the following: is it good to take or not? In the daily lesson, we have seen examples when we're not exchanging the pawns, but this is an exception. This time, white can take on c5, pawn takes back, trading off the queens, queen d8, rook d8, and now using the fact pawn on c5 is not protected well, white goes knight b3. We would like to take this pawn. If black goes pawn c4, knight a5 already wins one, because it's a double attack on b7 and c4. Black cannot protect both of them at the same time. After knight b3, if black goes knight d7, we go still bishop e3, pressuring on c5. All the time we use the fact that pawn b6 move is impossible because bishop attacks the rook on a8. Otherwise, again after c4 and knight a5 moves, white is staying with an extra pawn. We never tell you don't exchange the pawns and release the tension. Often we will have good reasons to do this. Now let's go ahead and see the next position. This is a test where the daily lesson opening blunder bishop g4, and question was the following: is it a blunder this time or it is not? At this moment, capturing bishop f7 is not working, and here is the reason. After king f7, knight g5 check. Instead of going back with the king and losing bishop on g4, black can use the fact white queen is also under attack and capturing queen g5. Now after bishop g5 and bishop takes d1, black's staying with the piece versus the pawn of opponent, which is a terrible outcome for white. So bishop f7 tactic is not working this time. Let's go ahead and see the next position. This is a test for the daily lesson dislodging a knight. It's about situations when opponent has a strong knight and we're trying to get rid of this. Previously we discussed the technique when we're going b3, a3 and b4, slowly doing this. You might be familiar with the idea from the daily lesson. But this is an exceptional situation and there is no need to play pawn b3. White can play pawn a3 directly, and after a4, when black tries to block our b4 advancement, white has queen d1 move. This time we have too many attackers on a4 pawn, and white is winning this. For this reason, after a3, black cannot prevent it, and after pawn f5, we continue with the b4 move. It's always good to know that if you have an idea, the best way is most probably is the most accelerated one. Now let's go ahead and see the next one. This is a test for the daily lesson positional pin. It's about situations when opponent has a strong bishop on the long diagonal and our bishop is not doing that great. Since we played pawn b3, black's bishop on g7 is dangerous. Our dark squares are weakened. We would like to exchange this bishop, or we would like to pin it. White goes now knight e5. First of all, exchanging the knight on c6, otherwise we cannot locate our bishop on e5 square. And after knight takes and bishop takes back, already bishop on g7 has a strong competitor on e5. Once the knight from f6 goes anywhere, we're going to trade off strong bishop of opponent. Let's go ahead and see our next position. This is a test position for a daily lesson, creating connected passers. At this moment, white played a4. They have connected pawns on the center, but our b6 pawn stops the advancements of the c1. If we ignore opponent's a4 move and go something like h5, white will go pawn a5, sacrificing this pawn. But after c5, white gets two connected passers, and it's very dangerous for black. They cannot allow this. For this reason, after a4, the strongest reply is to go pawn a5. Now white pawns are blocked and black will be able to use advantage of the pawns on the king side. 4 pawns versus 2, slowly pushing and getting a counterplay. This was an important endgame idea, preventing opponent from creating connected passed pawns. Let's go ahead and see the next one. This is a test for the daily lesson h-pawn in attack. At this moment, white has a queen and some pieces next to opponent's king, which is not really very safe. Opponent's queen is far away, and this is a great reason to start the attack. White continues now, pawn to h4, trying to play h5 and h6. From the daily lesson, we have seen that it could be very dangerous for black, so they don't want to allow h5. But if black plays h5, it weakens the pawn chain, and white at the moment can take bishop g6, pawn takes queen g6, and after king f8, knight g5. Now queen f7 is the mating threat, and whenever black prevents this with rook d7, we can play knight e6 check. King e7 and knight c5. Take a look at this position. We destroyed opponent's king's position. White has already 3 pawns for it. Monster knight on c5 attacking opponent's queen and the rook. White is going to take much more material at the moment. So after queen g7 we will be capturing on d7. White is absolutely winning, and here is the power of h4 pawn in attacking. Let's go ahead and see the next one. This is a test for the daily lesson, prevent opponent's h5. In other words, we have seen attacking examples, when, after our h4, h5 ideas, our opponent was playing pawn to h5. For this reason, we often started with bishop h6 move, preventing h5 ideas for opponent. But the thing is, for white it's not really necessary to go with bishop h6 now, because black doesn't have pawn on the h-file. In opposite, this gives opponent some time to start counterplay with b4, bishop g7, king takes, pawn h4 and b3. This is very messy and complicated. Instead of going for this at the beginning, white can start with pawn h4. And now after b4, we're little faster. Pawn h5, after b3, we can take, pawn takes and a3. No need to exchange these bishops. We already have our pawn on h5. Pawn a3 temporarily blocks opponent's ideas, and we are ready to keep opponent's king naked after capturing on g6, or if black decides to take and open up the lines. Of course, it's good to block opponent's defensive ideas, but this test was a little tricky one. Black doesn't have pawn on the h-file, so no reason for a bishop h6 move. Now, let's go ahead to the next position, which will be the last one for today. This is a test for the daily lesson, becoming a tactic ninja. At this moment it's black to move. We have very messy position, white's exchange up, knight on h5 is under attack. We're also trying to attack on opponent's king, but it's not really simple how to do this. If black here tries to play knight g3 check, it's not really making any sense. White can take with the rook, queen f1 check, rook g1. It doesn't work. For this reason, at the beginning, black has a super strong attacking resource. Black plays bishop g4, and this is the reason why we created Tactical Ninja course, to show these kind of exciting examples as well as strengthening your tactical skills. At this moment, white cannot capture on g4 with the pawn, because queen on f7 is hanging. So we will be winning the queen. After bishop g4, white has to take with the rook, because bishop f3 is our mating threat. Rook takes, and now we play queen f1 check. You may say, what is the idea after rook g1? The thing is, now our queen is on a better spot, and knight g3 check, white cannot take with the rook because there is a pin on the first rank. Okay, what if white takes? Suddenly we have queen h3, unexpected checkmate. So the tactic beginning with bishop g4 has this strongest idea. And now bishop f3, as I have mentioned, is impossible, so black turns to be winning in this position. Chess is a very rich game, and these kind of beautiful tactics will be happening very often. It's good to know the motives, and wish you good luck in your further games. As I have mentioned, this was our last example. Gabuzyan was here with you. Thank you for your subscriptions, likes and sharing this video with your friends. We appreciate it a lot. I will see you next time in another ChessMood videos.